Designing is a mindset. So it doesn't really matter. Like today you might learn Balsamiq, we'll walk through it. Maybe in about 2 years, there's going to be a new tool. Figma is new on the block. We're going to get a new tool 2 years down the line. And over the course of your career, you're probably going to use 15 different tools. And every 2 years, you're going to learn a new tool. It's not the tool you use, it's how you approach designing. And that part is really important. The other thing to remember is as a product manager, you are not going to be creating production ready designs most of the time, unless you're in a startup of like 10 people and you're doing literally everything. The possibility that you're a founder yourself and that's something you do, the likelihood that you're going to actually create production ready designs is pretty low. What you really want to do is be able to communicate the core idea that you want your product to be around. And you want to be able to communicate that idea to your designer, and whenever necessary, step in and help your designer out. Okay, it's a couple of cleanup things. I can do that while you focus on something else. The other thing to keep in mind is when you start, working as a product manager, you're going to start realizing how mature your organization is design-wise. We talked about this last week with Sophie. Actually, we talked about a pattern library and a design system. And typically tools like Sketch and Abstract, which is what I've used before, or Figma, which I'm using now at work, they heavily rely on pattern libraries. And it's so much easier as a product manager to just pick up on what your UX team overall has built in terms of components and structures and just fit them in. So it's not like you're going to be the one creating these pattern libraries. You shouldn't be the one creating those as a PM. That should really come from a UX, someone who's like a dedicated UX person. So having said that, let's get started with our workshop on Balsamiq. And feel free to, like I said, stop me as you feel necessary. So what we're going to do, because I love books, we're going to create an online bookstore. And what I really want us to do is maybe create 1 or 2 screens. And then as we walk through kind of how and why we're creating these things, once we create maybe 2 screens, what I really want to do is I basically want to walk you through Envision Prototyping to explain why we do prototyping. So let's get started. So the first thing you're going to see in Balsamiq is you can actually create your own new project. And I would ask that you go ahead and do that. There's so many tips on how to use it. So go ahead and create, when you log in, you'll be able to create a new project, name it whatever you want. And you should see a blank screen like that. So I'll give you all like a minute to get started, create your own project and a blank screen. And give me raised hands if once you're done. Almost there. Just a couple more people. If anyone's having trouble, also let me know at any point in time. Okay, so most of us now have an empty blank project here. Let's start with designing this bookstore, online bookstore for iOS, right? So right out of the bat, let me actually zoom in a little bit because it might help. Let's see. Okay, right off the bat, there's a whole bunch of assets that come in Balsamiq, for example, up top where you can, and this is pretty standard. You'll get this in Figma. You'll get this everywhere. You basically have some standard layouts that you can pick from. So I'm going to pick an iPhone, and I'm just going to drag it in. Okay. So you can actually see that now. And so now we want to basically, because it's an online store, let's say you want to start with the name of your company. Let me see, let's just drag in a big title, which is one form of a a title that you can use. It's probably the largest header you can find. And I'm going to call it, because I'm a book nerd, so we'll call it Sonnets and Rhyme. And we can drag and drop it and position it however we want to. And then obviously you probably want a pretty standard menu bar or a link bar that'll help you, your users navigate your website. And the way to do that would be just drag in a link bar from the top, and then rename the link items that you want. So you could have home, which is pretty solid. You could do, let's see, maybe books and about us, and maybe a blog or a staff pics or something like that. And if you see, when you click on this item, you can actually format a whole bunch of stuff on the right-hand side. So you can actually position it however you want. Let's say you want the text color to be something different. Let's say I love purple, so we can make it purple. Actually, I kind of like it blue. So we're going to go back to blue, but a different kind of blue. You can actually format the links, so you can add the web address of whatever those pages are going to be. Do you want anything default selected? Maybe home, because this is the home page. And then you can actually modify the font size, which I'm going to make it 15, so it's actually nice and big. There we go. And you can change the selection color to be something different. And in our case, because it goes well with blue, we'll go with a version of red. Okay, so now you've got sort of your link bar created, and something that's absolutely essential to, excuse me. So something that's absolutely essential to an online store. One sec. Let's give it a minute. Okay, there we go. Is a search box. So if you see on your text assets up top, you can actually drag and drop a search box right here. And you can say whatever you want. So let's say I want to show a state where I've already entered the author name, right? I can type that in. You can also leave it as search, just so that it's like the default state. And you can resize it however you want. You can make it as big as you need. Let's see. There's an option to auto size it, which I don't personally like all the time, but it's useful because if you want to make sure the aspect ratios are correct all the time, you can do that. And let's see. So that's what auto size would do. Now, if you notice, one of the things you'll see here is that none of these are really fine. Like, they're not very refined designs. Like, they're not clean lines. They're not very filled out. And the reason being is because you're designing a wireframe. And wireframes are supposed to be messy. They're supposed to be quick. And you can actually just like very quickly design one to get an idea together and present it to people. So the whole point of this exercise in wireframing is that it's literally a product manager's easiest tool to get a working prototype ready and present something. I've done wireframes in less than 2 hours at times and taken it to my stakeholders and said, hey, by the way, this idea we discussed like 2 hours ago, here's what it's going to look like. So it's not very refined. It's not perfect. And it's not finished or polished, but it'll do the job. So now that you've got your search screen, let's assume that you want to actually add, your search actually returned images, and that's the state you want to show. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I keep saying state, but let me clarify what state really is. Essentially, every single action that the user performs on your screen, your app, your website, whatever it might be, is going to change the state of the screen. An action usually results in an outcome. So a state is really, for example, you could, take this out, and it could basically be a blank search bar, and that means nothing's been searched for. Or when I say I actually write the author name, it means I've searched for the author name. I want to show when I search for the author name, how does the screen look like? So I'm going to go into Media up top, and I'm going to drag an image. And basically, I'm not going to add any alternative text to that image. What I'm going to do with that is I want to actually add a little text. And I'm going to use a label for that. So I'm using it's called a label, literally a label. And then I'm going to say, this is the name of the book by Naomi Klein. Okay, I can again change the font size if I want. I can make it big. I can make it disabled, which would make it unselected. And then let's say you've got some kind of description about it, but I really don't want to add any descriptions. So here's something interesting, by the way. You can actually format in almost HTML inside of this wireframe. So if you look at how, when you pulled in the text field from the top, you can see actually like how you want to, if you wanted to indent a paragraph, how would you do that? If you wanted to color a portion of this text, how would you do that? How would you create a second row? How would you create a web link? So Balsamiq tells you what these formats would look like, should you need them. In our case, I'm not going to make this complicated. So I'm just going to say, you know what, we're going to add some random description. So I'm going to create 2 rows of a placeholder for description. I'm going to resize this. And I'm going to move it down here, which gives the idea that there's going to be some rows of description. You don't have to add it in. And then I'm going to add in another little text label. And this time, I'm going to put in the price. Let's say this is $15. That's a really cheap book. Oh, actually, now I'm realizing I kind of want to reposition this whole thing. So let's do this. Okay. So position it, closer.
Hello, Anwesha.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Not a
I
problem.
just had a doubt. When you inserted the text area now just below the author, you got in those HTML code of lines. How do you get that by default? Because I tried just pulling in and dropping, and I see a plane where I can enter the text.
Did you pick this text element?
Oh, no, I picked text area.
Okay, yeah. Text area is where you have to fill it out. There is another
Okay.
element next to it called text.
Uh-huh.
And when you do that, it'll actually show you how it's going to look with each of these formatting elements, and you'll be able to basically modify it.
Okay. Much.
Like that. But we don't need it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Anwesha.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So now I've got, okay, this is kind of the format we're going to follow for all of the books that show up. So I'm just going to select pretty much everything I just created, copy, and I'm going to paste it. Because, you don't usually have searches with just one book. You can, but you want to show the full state. And I'm going to say, you know what, let's say this is the other book. Ooh, this is always fun. This is actually a really good example of things to test for. When you're designing, whatever you're designing, it's always good to put edge cases and see what is going to break your design. In this case, you kind of need a 2-liner. So your some text label is probably not going to work. Another option could be, you split it up into two, but that's really complicated. Like it's not going to look great. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want this. I'm actually going to a text area. Why not? And I'm going to make it tiny, so, and it'll wrap. This is especially important when we start dealing with things like prices and currencies, because you're not like something that's $100 could be like more digits in a different currency. And that's not something we plan. If we don't plan for it, it's going to break your design. So it's always a good idea to test for those things as you're designing. And then I am going to make this. I'm going to adjust it, make this larger. And I want to see how the two line looks like. Could we possibly have two lines with, you know, this design and then, okay, yeah, it kind of works. All right, we can do this. And so we go, okay, this is, let's say $10, and you want to center this image, and that's your spec. Now, this is your search bar. Now you're starting to think about, what does the user really care about at this point? What if there's 5 different books that show up in the search? How do you want to use the real estate on this page? So one way to do it would be to add a vertical scroll. Now let's see, where would we find a vertical scroll? So you can, instead of actually looking through all of the assets, a simple way to do that would be, can I look for a vertical scroll bar? So just search for vertical scroll and it shows up. Oh, look, there is a vertical scroll bar. Select it, it'll drag it for you, and then position it however you want to. And voila, there you go. So this basically now says, okay, these are just the top 2 results, but the user can technically scroll through several different books that show up as part of this search, if there are more than 2, which is great because it means you can use the bottom half of the screen for something else if you wanted to. Here's the other fun part. So let's say the user actually wants to select one of these books. You've actually not given them anything to select it with. So what do you want to do now? I say we basically create another text label, and this is what I want to do, because I'm going to say, you know what, this is easy. When I say add to cart, it's pretty straightforward. And I'm going to change the color so the users can see that I expect an action. I can, not going to give a name, I can bold it so the customer can actually see it. And then what I want to do is I want to see if I can add a quantity. Of course, I can't spell today. They have a number picker. Let's see what it's called. I don't think they call that here. Okay, let's look at all assets, buttons, and it's called a num stepper.
Are you looking for stepper? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And let's default it to 1. And there we go. Now you're realizing the design looks very cramped. I'm going to actually give more real estate to this instead. Give it a little bit more spacing, increase the scroll bar, position it. There we go. Now, what you're going to do is you are going to create a cart. And the way to do that, and it's going to be rough because, you know, you basically want to show kind of a half screen pop-up or a takeover, however you want to call it. I'm going to do that using a, let's see if they actually have a takeover. I think they do. Excuse me, I'm going to use a modal again, it's going to be not perfect because it doesn't have curved edges, and you know that ultimately it's going to need curved edges, but that's fine. To actually, now on this modal, pull in a text area. And you want to say in your cart now. Okay. And you can make this one text area, you can make it two, that's up to you. Actually, we're going to see if I can find a container. That might be easier. Instead of a modal, I think a window actually might be better, or a rectangle, because it'll help you demarcate it better. Can I make it white? Yep, that's far better. Let's do this. Let's use a rectangle instead because it comes by default with a white screen, which is what you really want. And then pull in the, and you probably want to bring it to front. Here we go. You can take out the border for this one and then make it white. Now you basically, so I'm thinking, well, when I'm shopping for a book, the thing that I like to do is I want to see what my total is so far. Like I add like 20 different books, and then I'm probably going to delete like 5 of them to make sure it fits in my budget, right? So what's the best way to do that? Like you can either have a cart on top like Amazon does, or you could have like a constant half screen that shows what your cart currently has. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add in another text. Pull that here. I'm going to add in, oh, I already added The Tempest, William Shakespeare, why not? And then this was already $7. And that's what I have so far in the cart. I'm going to take away the border again. And maybe it already has an image. Oh, I also want to say how many I bought. So I say, okay, quantity, because that makes sense. I've only bought one so far, and it's for $7. And I'm going to pull in an image again. Oh, oops. That did not seem right. Let's see. Come on. I think it's just, hang on, let's see. I think we do. There we go. Why won't it? There we go. Okay, so now I pull in an image. I make it smaller. I don't want an alt text. And I'm thinking, well, if I wanted to remove, like if I'm making a trade-off on, see, this is where an auto size would be nice, because it actually can set the aspect ratio right. And now I'm thinking it would be nice if I could remove something from the cart as I'm also adding things to the cart. So I'm going to see if I can get a trash outline button, or an icon, sorry. And I'm going to say, you know, I'm going to give every user the option to delete it right from the cart. And I'm going to make it a small icon, and I'm going to change the color to red so it's very visible. You could also make it an extra small icon. So you actually have the option to choose the size for this clip art in Balsamiq from the right panel, and then you can position it so that it's like very obvious that you're intending customers to actually delete it if they want to without having to change screens or go anywhere else. And at the bottom, you probably want to show them the total, which is right now at $7. And maybe you change the font here, make it normal, make it a little bit bigger so they know. And you always want to give them the option, go into buttons, you want to give them the option to check out. And so you pull in a normal button, stretch it out so it looks just right. And we're going to say checkout. They have the option to check out. That's your screen 1. Now, you can be,
Anwesha,
yes,
won't it be a good idea to let the user change the quantity in the cart as well?
sure, you can add that too.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, that's exactly right. So then you start thinking, exactly, you can totally do that and add a number stepper there if you'd like. That's totally fine. So this is the first screen. Now let's say you want to design what happens if the user selects one of these 2 books. What would that state look like? So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it. You can create a new page if you want. I'm just going to create it on the right because it's easier for you to then see what that looks like. So let's say the user selects Pencils and Windows, adds it to cart. Now what does this look like? So in order to do that, you're basically going to have to make some adjustments. And you might actually end up going back and reformatting your first screen now. Because now you see there's no real space for a second book. So do we add another vertical scroll here? Should we do that? Would that look good? And let's say we now update the total to, what is it, 15 and 7, 22. Would that be a good design? Maybe. Or maybe we make it so doodles, right? This is the best part of it. You actually get to experiment really, really quickly. So you can basically say, you know what, I'm just going to try another thing here. Let's see which one looks better. And I'm going to basically say, you know what, this is fine. And I'm just going to put the price with the space here. Takes up less space. I'm going to color it a different color and make it maybe like a dark, oh, nope, it's all right. Can't do that. You'd have to actually add like a,
Then we'll have to put it in a separate box there.
or you can actually add in like an HTML tag in there if you wanted. Maybe you say, you know what, I'm just going to make this image really small. I'm going to move this up to the top and make this smaller. You might even reconsider the image if you wanted. Be like, maybe I have more space here. This is $22. Now this is the new book. Maybe the author name is not necessary. Maybe it is. Up to you. And then this is 15. Okay. Does this serve the purpose that you're trying to get to, which is the ability for the user to actually add, delete cart, like things from the cart, see the cart as they're shopping? It kind of does. It may not be perfect, but you can also always like say, okay, what information is really necessary to the user when they're making a decision on what to keep and what to eliminate? Probably not the author name. And then you're like, okay, maybe this makes it look cleaner, but it kind of doesn't because now you don't know, are they together? Are they separate? So maybe you go back to your older design, but it's still cleaner because it's less information. And you're like, okay, I'm just probably not going to keep this design at all. I'm just going to hang on to the second one. And now let's assume my customer is done and I want to design myself a checkout screen. So I start again with my iPhone. Okay. And I'm going to delete this, or actually I'm going to move this out to the bottom because it's not important, right? And one of the fun things with Balsamiq is your screen never ends. Like you can make this page as big as you want. You can also add comments if you want. That way, like you can actually add in like flow decisions to say things like, for example, customer clicked add to cart and basically have an arrow, not that one. Let's use this one and basically show the next date if you want. So it's pretty easy to kind of make this page whatever you need it to be. So now let's design the state where the user just hit checkout and you want to see what it looks like. So, and again, this is by no means a perfect design or anything at all. This is basically just us going through some ways of thinking and how you want to like arrange real estate on your screen. With app design, it becomes very critical because anything above the fold, so your screen can obviously scroll as much as you want it to, but anything above the fold is what's going to catch the user's attention the most. So you want to make sure you're using your real estate in the right way. You also want to probably have like analytics tracking on how much are users spending time on each part of the screen. All of those become important decisions in ultimately tracking your design metrics, which is also something we talked about last week, or Sophie did. So there is that. Now, here's what I'm going to do. Well, always end up doing that. I'm going to actually just recreate this because it's easier. Instead of, since we don't have a lot of time, and I want to leave some time for questions. Okay. So your top usually won't change. Now you're in the cart. You basically want to add in probably a subtitle, which says review your cart. Probably want to make it more spacious. Actually don't like that capitalization very much. And we're going to change the color to pick something dark and blue so users can see it. And now you want to think about what are the decisions the user makes when they're on the cart. So their cart, the first one's going to be Tempest. We should make sure that's the right thing. Okay. And this was $7. And you probably still want to carry over this tiny little remove icon because that's something they might want to do. And like I think one of you pointed out, it might be a good idea to also have a stepper here so they can actually edit the quantity, right? Then let's add in the next book, which was Fences and Windows. And here we go. All right. This was, and if you notice, it's automatically telling you what the grid is like, so you can actually position things pretty nicely when it comes to Balsamiq. Like, so now here's another fun thing. you can't actually grid it to what you had here, because if you did, you're not really allowing yourself to have a longer title. So you're going to have to figure out if you want to wrap it around or you want to just give it a different kind of padding as you're laying this out. And maybe you say, like, you arrange it a little differently or you center it. It's not the, like, I think this is like this is like a secondary CTA, so you, like a call to action, so you don't really care. Maybe this is something you add more, like, you don't really need a description here. Do you really? So maybe you just replace it. Like, yeah, this actually works better. Let the user pick their quantity here because this makes a lot more sense. And then let's say they actually had, again, let's say they had more than 2 books that they've just got. Do you really want this to be endless until they get to the payment screen, or do you want them to just review it? And it would be really nice if they actually saw a running total here, right? Because that way, no matter what they did, they'd actually be able to see the total at the top, which is what they really care about. Now, you want to give them something to enter a credit card with, and add it in here. And basically, you can do something like this. I like to use a combo box because it's kind of easy, but you can do it however you want. Enter your payment. You don't really need to show what it's going to be like because everyone knows what a credit card field looks like, so you can pretty much do that. Hate borders. No borders. Ah, they took that away. Okay. Probably want a little arrow. Let's see. You could use that. You could also use a down arrow, which might be nice. And make it small or even extra small and position it right. So basically it looks like that. You can add a border, whatever looks good to you, you can do that. And then you probably want to give them the chance to add their shipping address, which is equally important. So basically you can think of this as like, oh, this is gonna, if they click on this, it's gonna open up a drawer. And maybe you don't want to show that state on the first screen, but you show a second state or a second screen where the drawer is opened out. Then basically want to show them the resting state. Add shipping address. And there we go. And basically that allows them to add that. Maybe we make this a little bit bigger. Oh. Go ahead.
Hello,
Yeah.
Anwesha.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so at the time of review, if we want to provide some more suggestions, like usually Amazon does or any other site tries to suggest more books. So if you want to give that option in here, like
Yeah,
because you have selected these books, do you want to again add
yeah,
these
you
books
can
to your cart?
basically take these out. You can add a carousel here. You can add a carousel here also. So think about it this way. This real estate that you're using, there's different ways of using it. You could always design a state where you actually say the bottom of the screen is going to look very different. So you could take away this half screen takeover that I've designed here, and you could almost make that like a continuation of the full screen. And you could almost show it this way. The way I would do that is instead of using an iPhone purely, I would say container. I would do like an easy way to do that might be if you pulled in the smartphone. Where did it go? There we go. Pulled in a generic smartphone and you show a scrolled up state, right? And you can almost do pretty much everything here. You can paste that. And instead of this, you can basically say, let's see. You can make this a carousel if you wanted. So it's kind kind of a scrolled up state, so you're not going to see the full thing. The search bar might have gone away. So you can actually design like a scrolled up and a scrolled down state if you want, and then you can actually put a carousel here. So you could almost do, let's see, I don't know if they have a carousel. They might not out of the box. So you might actually have to create that yourself.
Okay.
And you might want to do it this way. Almost like the Airbnb tiles. Very little. And then you could do a little text here and say, see more. And you can do another arrow here, which is like a, let's see, angle right.
Yeah, and maybe give a horizontal scrolling as well too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, you can pretty much
Yeah.
do, you get the idea. So you can pretty much
Mhm.
do however you want. But the whole point is you want to think about the user experience, right? You want to
Right.
think about exactly what do I want my user to see? How do I want them to behave on this? What is my intent? I want them to buy a lot of things. I want to keep them on this app or on my, website. And the best way to do it is re-engagement. So recommendations actually work very well that way. You didn't like what you saw, but I could recommend you a whole bunch of things so that you keep tapping and you eventually find something on my app, right? So yeah, so all of that is great, like product mindset. Like you think about what you want your user experience to be, what you want the user to do. But we're almost getting close to the end of the session. So I do want to take a few minutes to show you all how to do like an Envision prototyping. So we're going to go ahead and let's see, where is it? Where is my export? Not that. Okay. You should be able to export from here, project, export, current wireframe to PNG, export selected. Let's see what it does. Let's call it that. Oh, it didn't obviously select the whole thing. There we go. That should do it. Okay. Yep, let's replace it. And you should be basically able to export everything like an image. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of it, or at least to them. And selected. Let's call it wireframe 2. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to show you how this looks. So when you should now be on Envision. Give me a raised hand if you're in there. You'll need the link, let me know. Give me a raised hand if you're in there. I see 4 people who have. Not everyone has. So I know to start. Priyanka, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I just wanted to know what is the project type we should choose under Envision. I'm asked to
Prototype?
choose
Yeah,
prototype. Okay.
yeah. Okay. So once you select a prototype, it is going to open up something like this. And it'll give you an option, sync your projects from either Sketch or any of the other like tools like Photoshop, or you can drag and drop your wireframes. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to say, here we go. Let's pick the two designs that we just created, and I'm going to open those up. And it's added these screens. You can always reorder them, but obviously this is our right order. Now, go ahead and view screen. And when you do that, you see how this defaults to the eye, which is the preview mode. What you want to do is you want to go into build mode so you can actually build a prototype. So we go into build mode. Now, what do you want the user to do? Your next state, so prototyping is really where the states make a huge difference. You basically, in a static design, it's very difficult for your engineering team or your stakeholders to follow along. If I did this, what would happen? If I did this, what would happen? You're basically going to have to chart out like a million different states. But once you've charted out these states, if you want to present, a prototype is the best way to present. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say the customer says add to cart, and I can actually select the destination to show what happens when they add to cart. And I want to say maintain scroll position after click. What that means is when it flips over to the next screen or the next state, it'll maintain the same positioning of the screen. And that's it. And I say save. And then I go back into preview mode, and it actually starts telling you where you can click. And if you do, it now automatically switched to the next screen, which now shows the cart updated. Everyone with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. Now let's go back. Let's exit this, right? So let's go back to the UTD, and now I basically want to export from Balsamiq my final screen. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to say, okay, here goes. Export this. Current frame, export selected. I'm going to call it frame 2. Of course not 3. And then I'm going to add another screen, and I can do that right from here. Upload another screen and go with this. Now let's go back to the second screen, and again, if you notice, it defaults to the preview mode. Go into the build mode and highlight checkout. And now you basically want to go to new wireframe 3, gesture, instant. You can just do that and then go back to preview. And now if you select checkout, it basically goes to the next screen. So obviously there's a lot we haven't done here, right? One of the things that's missing, if you notice, is a back screen. It would be really nice to add a top nav bar where you have like a back so that you can flip between these designs. What you really want to do is create a working prototype that basically, so you can, let's go back to the one here. Okay. What you really want to do ideally is you want to create a separate wireframe for what happens if they increase the number stepper, what happens if they scroll down, what happens if they hit delete. All of those would be new wireframe states that you would create, and then your prototype would be able to demonstrate those. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're almost at the end of the hour. Let's pause for questions. I think this is a good time. Let's take maybe the next 10, 15 minutes to address any questions you all might have. So yeah, I'll stop here.
On the second screen, right, like where we were experimenting with various positions of the screen elements, If I have two or three concepts in my mind, should I create two or three different screens, or should I arrange each row in a separate way for, whoever is gonna take the decision to decide which positioning to go with?
So that's a great question because I've actually seen experienced designers do this a lot, where they will, I consider this to be poor designing, honestly, where you're going to take a one row that looks one way and another row that looks another way. The reason why it's poor design is because when you start building out prototypes, consistency of the data is extremely key. And to be able to see what that full screen and that full experience is going to look like is equally important. So if you're not going to be able to provide that, yes, it's a lot more work to like create 5 different doodles, but that's the whole point of a wireframe is you're not actually creating the finished high fidelity designs. You can go through this process and you'll figure out yourself which one doesn't look good. And you can trash it out. And it's not a lot of extra work. Like it's just kind of replicating, playing around with it. But yeah, don't put mix design ideas unless they're two separate screens. Don't mix design ideas because that really affects a stakeholder's ability to understand what you're trying to communicate.
Got it.
Pratik, do you have a question?
Uh,
Oh, those
actually,
are just raised
was
hands. That have been there for a while.
Also, like, so, just the wireframing or prototyping may not always be that something is assigned to you before UI is designed, right? At times, you may need to change the UI, um, like 2 or 3 years down the line after launch. Like maybe you are
Yep.
changing the UI. So, users obviously get accustomed to looking at things a particular way, right? So how could you make it more comfortable for the user to adopt to the new design? Like, are hints a good suggestion, or a walkthrough before the initial launch of the app? So how do you go about that?
So it depends. If it's sort of an app that's very like custom or niche. For example, one of the things I used to work with before is travel agencies use certain systems to make bookings. If it's something that custom, you probably are going to create training manuals and training documents before some kind of a major rework, or you're constantly like every 2 weeks you're sending them sort of an update of here's how your interface has changed.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an app that goes out to millions of people,
Uh,
Can try that.
okay, sorry, I think I lost everyone for a minute
yes,
there.
sir. Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's an app where there's like millions of users, obviously, that's really hard to do. You can't actually like send out, no one reads release notes. Nobody reads release notes when we download things from the App Store. So one crappy way of doing it is tooltips. Tooltips hardly ever get a lot of retention, but they draw your attention. An orange tooltip, a red tooltip, it will, draw your attention. It's bad. Don't do it. Um, you can do it if it's a small thing, but it never usually works. Animations work very well. Guided questions and, tap here to do this. Are you looking for that?
We lost you again.
I have not lost internet so frequently in one call in the last 6 months. I do not know what is going on. Spooky. Um, but yeah, so essentially, animations or letting people know, are you looking for something? We've changed the positioning or the location of this button, actually usually helps a lot.
or just a small guided video when you update the app or you just launch the app,
Yeah,
so it will make sense for the users, right?
yeah. But I will tell you this, app users are very savvy these days. Like I think they're very used to playing around and they're used to like all of the ways to like work around an app. Oh, what does this do? And I think the bigger question sometimes is how much should they trust an action? So always like think about the copy, like the verbiage that you're using on a call to action. One of the things we see on like Hopper Hotels, for example, if you tell them continue to book, it's a lot worse than review your booking. Because continue to book makes them feel like they have no chance to see any details that are missing. They don't know they've already added their credit card to the app. We have the ability to charge them. They're like, but wait, I didn't see what room type I just selected, or what are the taxes? Why don't I see this on the screen? It's like, review your booking tells them you've got one more step. So I think that becomes more important when you change like the layout, the trust factor, like what are you really communicating and what are they really understanding? I think that's really important for you to test out before you launch it.
That is actually super insightful. I don't think I have ever considered the verbiage used on the app,
It is
and that is
immensely
so.
important.
Yeah, I'm actually
Immense.
going to take note of that to discuss in my meeting tomorrow.
It's immensely important. I cannot tell you how much we can change like metrics just by changing language.
Yeah.
It's pretty phenomenal.
So I have a final question. Like since we spoke about metrics, and this is more from a product management perspective rather than UX design, right? When we relaunch the UI of the app, or we are collecting statistics around, how users are interacting with screens and how much time they're spending on there. Would you say it is reasonable to track or start finding insights from these numbers right from day one of launch, or would you want to give them like a 1 or 2 months time period to get settled in so that the numbers actually make sense? Because when on the first day or the first week of using the app, they may not be familiar, and they may drop off, or the numbers may not be really accurate.
I like to track it from day one with the caveat that my first 2 weeks are going to be noise.
Got it. Right. And like, would you want to see like pattern change, or like how smoothly they transition through these screens and stuff?
I will tell you something, just from what I've seen, because this is how I started out thinking initially, and I've over and over seen my thinking proven wrong. Customers are smarter than you are. Go with that assumption always. If an experiment isn't doing well in the first 3 weeks, it will never do well. And if it's the design that's crappy, you will need a redesign. It's not that they don't know. It's that if they had to know, they would know when they first looked at it. Your app was good, and they saw it, and they got the value prop, and they used it the right way. If they didn't, they're not going to. No matter how long you're going to leave it there to soak, they're not going to realize it's good. I always thought, oh, the app rollout is slower, so maybe, not everyone kind of understands it. No, they do. It fails. It fails. 3 months, 3 weeks, doesn't matter. If it's bad, it's bad. And have the confidence that the data you're seeing is correct. Don't ever think that it's going to improve if you let it stay for longer, because then you've just lost time to try
Correct.
something new. So,
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. So the one that you showed, which is low wireframing, so this is only for the stakeholders, right? So when does it transition from stakeholders, or when do you give it to the designers for the final UX or final UI thing, so that they can transition, they can give it to the developers?
Good question. I like to use my wireframes pretty much in a very fluid way. So I usually design wireframes and give them to my designer and my stakeholders at the same time, because it's a great way for me to get feedback from everyone. My designer is part of the process. This is just a way for me to brain dump ideas, right? So I usually include moment my doodles are done, the first thing I do is I actually meet with my designer and I say, this is what I'm trying to do. It's on your plate now. Work your magic, clean it up. If I need to take this to stakeholders, a wireframe prototype is pretty easy to do. Usually I've used it because the timelines have been crazy, and my designer doesn't deserve to be treated that way. It's like, I don't want you to give me high fidelity designs in like 2 days. I can do this. And I think that's usually when I use it for stakeholders. I've also used it for user testing, honestly, like a little bit cleaner wireframes, but I've like Proto.io, we've used that for user testing, like an idea also. So it's gone out to like outside, like, customers that have opted in for user testing to see it, and that was fine too. If it's a really small change, I've also given my wireframes to engineers. If it's one, and you know that there are specs, there's like pixels here, padding here, all of that stuff, you don't want to mess with that. That's when you want to actually tell your designer, you've got the components the way you need them to be, get it ready for the team. So I would almost treat this as your wireframing. To me is whiteboarding also. Like that's basically how I use it, because COVID, so you can't go into office. There are no whiteboards anymore. But also, like, normally, sometimes it's just you get an idea because you've been thinking about it and you don't quite know how to articulate it. You don't want to have a meeting just yet because you don't know what you're going to say. Sit down and wireframe it out, and that's basically your brain dump. And then have your meeting with your designer. So it's really how you feel comfortable. But to me, wireframing is a method of communication and articulating my idea better. So I involve my designer right from the start.
Thank you.
Hi, Anwesha. So I had from recently, from past 2-3 weeks, I was using this Instagram app, and I was seeing the change in the UI. Like one of the feature of searching was constantly moving from top right to the bottom, and I was seeing them changing almost once in 2 weeks. Like I get up in the morning and I'm like, okay, the usability for me as a user was getting tough, and I was just thinking, Instagram being such a commonly used app by so many users, why are they driving this testing like directly to the user and changing it constantly? This didn't happen once or twice, it's happened like thrice, and it's confusing. So how, right, maybe they're trying to understand if they can make the app better and increase and see which is the best option. But what is your take on it? How right is it for an app like this to be changing?
That's a really good question. So first off, sorry for the experience, but all apps do this. We all do this. Sometimes testing is so much, you can do 1,000 user testing like sessions, but in any given testing session, you're going to get 10 people, and that means 10 opinions. Whereas if you launch it on the app, you're going to get like thousands of opinions right off the bat. Did it matter to my users or didn't matter? So that's one thing. So a lot of us do this where we actually test all live, which basically means X% of all our users are going to see something different. And it's entirely possible that several of, like, you might be in several different experiments, and I might be in several different experiments. And so your and my experience will be completely different on the app because of how many different tests are running on the app at any given time. That's totally cool. What I do think, though, is they probably messed up on user ID assignments to experiments. And they kept probably accidentally switching some users between experiments, which is not great. Usually when you assign someone to an experiment, they stay in that experiment by default until like a new client comes out. Sometimes even then, it depends on how the experiment is set up on the back end or on the front end. But if it's a back end experiment, a user ID once assigned to the experiment isn't going to ever not be in that experiment unless the experiment itself is shut down. So that was buggy. That was probably Instagram not realizing what they were doing with user IDs. That shouldn't happen. That's just weird.
Okay, thank you so much, and it was a great session. For the first time, I got to have a hands-on experience with the wireframe. It was great.
Good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Hi, Anwesha. This is similar to the Instagram situation, actually. They implemented another feature that's been very difficult. As soon as a video starts, you have to click or tap on the video, and then it starts again from the very beginning, and you can't skip the reels function, right?
Yep.
And my question is, at what point do you realize this is a bad feature that you implemented and that you need to go back on it, and what data supports that? Or do you have to wait until you make a concrete decision, and just how do you do that?
That's a great question. So in last week's session, Sophie and I talked a little bit about two types of metrics. We talked about basic KPIs, which is what product managers always care about: conversion lift, RPT, RPU, ROI, whatever it be. And then designers care about design metrics. A lot of the design metrics focus on how long did your eye stay on a particular part of the screen, how far do you scroll down, how did you engage with the different elements, filters, sort, did you see them, did you use them, that sort of stuff. Where are they positioned? So your A/B tests on design can sometimes just change positioning of elements on the screen, and they'll like test those things, right? So the answer to your question actually depends on what the ultimate goal was for that test. If the goal was to test a rebranding, for example, all you did was you changed nothing. Your product offering did not change, but you jazzed it up in the app, right? Typically, you would expect to see a pretty significant impact right off the bat. Like whatever metric you were trying to move with that, if the branding change worked, if it was really catchy, if that was your intention, like users should automatically get drawn to that part of the screen, and they're just gonna do what I tell them to do there. You're going to get a pretty good signal right off the bat, and you'll also know because it didn't work. I think there are more subtle things that are harder to make a call on, especially screens that have a lot of information, because you don't really know what information users are reading or processing necessarily, and especially when they're like segmented. Like we have this one screen about hotel details, and it's just goes on and on. It's like, yes, I get it. Users want to know the image and the rating, and then they want to know the description, and they want to know the amenities, and they want to know the reviews, but how much? Like, I don't know. At what point do you redesign that screen to say, you know, what we have is not working? Because ultimately, that is not the screen that's asking them to do anything other than move on to go select your room, right? Which is always going to be a sticky footer at the bottom. So I don't really know. I can track whether they scrolled all the way to the bottom, how many users even scroll to the bottom. I can track how many users scroll a little bit, what's the last segment they scroll up to, but that's about it. And I think what we typically have realized is anything above the fold gives a really quick signal. Like, and before scrolling, you see it. If they see it, they do what you want them to do, you're winning. If they don't, you're losing. Change it. It's not working. But usually, like below the fold stuff is harder to test. And you might actually want to be very methodical about, like if you really want to redesign it or change the experience there, you probably want to be very methodical about why. What is the expected outcome? Is it just a design change because it's not soothing to the eye, it's not pleasing to the eye? Or do you actually intend to move metrics because of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I have a more overall question. As an undergraduate, I would like to interview for APM roles at different companies. What message relating to product management and product design should I be sending during an interview?
That's a great question. One of the things that I always ask aspiring product managers to start with is, what's your story? Your story is very important. Everyone has a different reason for becoming or wanting to become a product manager. What drives you and what makes you different, or what makes you, I won't say the right fit. Everyone's a right fit for some company. but what makes you the right fit for that company, or why do you really want to be a product manager? What pushes you? Like for me, my story is I come from a data background, and I actually got tired of not seeing anything get implemented. I got tired of not being able to impact people the way I wanted to at the pace that I wanted to, because I was not the person making the call on budget, or I was not the person making the call on roadmap. And I'm also very passionate about like gender equality. So I wanted to actually work on products that care about that are sensitive to like different user groups, and they care about like LGBTQ people. They care about like, not just being cisgendered and their like addressing and things like that. So I care about those things. And that was my story. It's like I got into product management because I thought there were a lot of things that are missing from the products we use every day, especially as a woman. Like like the cars I drive, no one has ever tested them with a female dummy. Can you believe that? It's like not a single car has been test driven with like a female dummy. It's created for a 70-kilogram male, which is not even the average male. So like stress testing is done that way. And it's very frustrating because you want to make impact. So everyone has a different story. Everyone has something that drives them, right? Everyone wants to make a difference. What is that, and why you? The other thing that I would say is, like if you're aspiring to go into product management, it's great to have at least and like a business case you've tried to approach. Like you've created a business case, you've created some designs, almost like a little portfolio for your idea. That's pretty nice to start out with. Always go with a cover letter. Never ever think the cover letters are useless. Trust me, people read them. Especially for PM roles, people read cover letters, and you should be customizing them if you aren't already. But in the cover letter, mention that you've got design skills, because for a lot of companies, that's important. It doesn't matter what tool you use. Everyone knows you can adapt to any skill set. Everyone can do that. Like even like coders, right? You don't have to be like proficient in a particular language to be able to code in it. You'll eventually learn. Same for design. You'll eventually learn the tool that they're using at their company. They want to know you've got some experience. They want to know you've got the product mindset. Like you're focused on the customer. You care about how the customer thinks. That is the one single thing I think for majority of the like top tech companies, they really care about that. If you can't demonstrate customer focus, it's hard. A product should never be something that's designed because you want to implement an idea. It should be an idea that others need, that you're facilitating. So I think communicating all of that in your resume and your cover letter combined is going to be a good idea.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. No, that was very detailed. Yeah, I'll definitely be using that in interviews.
Yep.
So I think a last question from my side. So in the last question, when Karthik asked about Instagram, so how much time do you take to test a particular feature set, whether it's working or not? And also from the A/B perspective, A/B or experiment perspective.
So when you say how much time it takes, you mean how much time should we let the experiment run?
Yeah. So for example, when Instagram changed from IGTV to Reels, so how much time will they test, and when will they make decision whether to go with the IGTV or Reels, or whether to remove or keep it? How much time will they take for the metrics to understand?
That's a great question. So usually there's a statistical way of determining that, right? So you want to test statistical significance depending on your total number of users, your confidence level. There's lots of online tools that'll help you estimate how many users need to be exposed to a certain variant before you actually reach statistical significance on the test, and you can actually make a decision on whether this test should run or not run, or was it successful or not. Because unless it's statistically significant, nothing you see is going to matter. basically doesn't matter. I think the decision on how many users you want to expose it to also depends on impact. So one of the things that we usually do is, if this is going to be very disruptive, expose it to fewer users, and the trade-off is it's going to run longer because it's not going to reach statistical significance. So to give you an example, there is something we launched in March, and we were hoping we would get results. So we'd increase the exposure to about 30%. 30% of users were seeing it. And we said, you know what, in like 4 weeks, we'll have an answer at this rate because that's how many users will have seen it, we'll hit significance. Then COVID happened and our users tanked in April. We basically got no one wanting to book travel in April, right? Because why? Why would they want to? And we had to make a call. We're like, this experiment is going to run. It's going to run for 3 months now because I don't have users. I'm not going to be able to make a decision. By July, we figured out that the 2 variants we were running were both outperforming the control, but we still didn't know which of the 2 variants was better. So we took away control, and now if you look at our app, we have 50% running on one variant and 50% on the other. And they're still running because I'm still waiting to see which one is better. So it really kind of depends on what's the decision, what's the experience, how disruptive is it. If it's very disruptive, like personally, I think Reels was very disruptive, but also like moving the like up top in Instagram was so disruptive. It's like, I'm used to seeing it here. Where the heck did that go? It's so disruptive. Imagine if they'd like tested this on 50% of users. Maybe they're still testing it. Who the hell knows? But like it might just, 5 days later, we might all wake up and see the like back down there, and it's very disruptive, and it actually can hurt retention depending on your app. With Instagram, it won't. They're pretty confident they're not going to lose us because we're obsessed with social media. But there could be a lot of apps where it matters, where like it makes a difference, and I think there you want to be very careful about how disruptive you're being. And sometimes disruption is the price you pay. Like there's times when I've run things where I know that I'm not going to make the money I want to make because it's a broken flow, but I still want to test it because it'll give me a signal, right? So does that answer your question, Dikshit?
Yeah, thank you so much.
I think another example for that is the YouTube comment section, wherein it was always at the bottom, and after that, sometimes they tried to bring in just below the video. And suddenly, there was a practice of me always scrolling down and watching the comments there. Mm-hmm. And I think after some time now, they've brought it back to bring it right below the video.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah, I think like I can't imagine if Amazon suddenly started being like super disruptive about, like, Amazon's winning point is that they're not disruptive in their experience at all. It's very consistent, very, very consistent. I doubt they've made major UX changes in like the last 5 years. If you think about the experience, because everyone's so used to it, they know it's going to be disruptive if they change something on the app. So, yeah. So I think, yeah, it's a trade-off you make.
Yeah, on that point, Amazon also even changed the register button to continue button just to maintain that uniformity.
Yep. Yep, that's a good point.
I think Amazon just most recently changed the way their buttons look. Like from a more 3D kind of a button, they went to like a flat design. And I was a really big fan of that. Like, yeah, that is like eye candy, and that's what I expect from a very big app, right? Sorry,
Yeah.
Karthik, I think I cut you off.
Oh, no, it's fine. A question about your role as product manager at Hopper. Is that more product management driven or more engineering driven, or is it a synergy between both of those roles where engineers and product managers work together? Do you work on the technical side?
So at Hopper, we don't have technical product managers.
Okay.
We only have, like, product management is a role that sits in business.
Mm-hmm.
However, having said that, I think almost all of our product managers are fairly technical enough where most of us can get into GitHub and actually review code and like do things that we need to do if we want to. I work very closely with my engineering team. My first day on the job, I sat down, figured out like what the architecture is. Like for me, that's important personally, because I don't think you can become very efficient at hacking and like at testing things quickly if you don't understand the architecture. But having said that, I drive the roadmap. I'm the one who keeps an eye on the numbers. I'm responsible if numbers tank. I'm also responsible for basically figuring out how we want to deliver that revenue, what our forecasts are for the revenue for this team, and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, the role sits in business, but I'm very, very involved in the technological part of it because it helps me. It helps me bring alternative ideas to the table. I think for most people like to think linearly. You build this, then you build this, then you build this. And someone I worked with at my previous company, he kind of helped me think non-linearly. Like, Anwesha, there are ways to like get to this without doing all of these things. That'll take you like an extra 5 weeks. And not knowing the technical implementation actually hinders you because you don't know whether that one thing is possible or not without doing the 5 other things before it. Once you actually understand the architecture, you can say, oh, but wait, don't we already get this like data from this random source here, and it doesn't have to pass through here, but you can basically pull that in here, proxy it, create some random garbage, and like push it out, but you'll get a signal, right? Like that's basically like to think non-linearly, you have to understand your system very well. Otherwise, you're always going to, like, engineers believe this too. They'd like to build things in order. Like, no engineer is going to tell you they like shipping something that doesn't have tests, that doesn't have visibility, logs. They just want to build everything. They want to make it perfect. And it's like, well, that's just going to take us forever. So sometimes I just, bring alternative ideas. Like, what if we didn't do this, but instead, like, tried this out? And it helps because it gets them to think about, oh, wait a minute, we could also make it even simpler by. And it kind of builds that like mindset or thinking where everyone's starting to think about quickest way to get a learning and whether or not to invest in it, essentially.
So does idea generation come solely from you, or do you take ideas from the engineering side, or
I take ideas from anyone who will share ideas.
Okay.
It's the only way to do it. You take ideas from everyone, you bring your own ideas to the table, and you don't get married to any idea, ever. Because the moment you get married to an idea, you're going to be blind to its faults. And that's not usually great. I don't know if y'all follow, trying to remember I'll send it over to Dikshit in LinkedIn and he can pass it along. But basically opportunity trees are really a great way to engage with your team. There is a product person who writes about like how to engage your team in brainstorming, and opportunity trees are a great way of doing it because basically what it does is start with an idea. Let's walk through the solution. Okay, this is one solution. From this problem, what other ideas are there? And so you've basically created a tree where each branch is an idea with a solution or multiple solutions of solving that problem. And your leaf nodes end up becoming like all of these different solution ideas, which you can then start estimating and figuring out which one wins.
That's interesting. I'll definitely look more into that. Is there an article or video?
I think, you know what, I'm going to look it up because this is going to bother me otherwise. I'm pretty sure opportunity solution trees. I'm going to send it y'all's way. I think it was in Product Talk. That's what it was.
I have it here, right here.
There we go. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun way of engaging with your team. I think eventually you won't even need the formal process. Your team will just come to you with ideas. That's kind of the relationship you want to build with them.
Mhm.
Yeah, and one good thing to keep in mind, never think of engineering as them and product as us. The
Mhm.
moment that divide, and a lot of organizations have functioned that way, then it's not very productive.
Mhm. So making it as collaborative as possible.
Always. Yep.
Okay.
Because you're the person that protects your team from executives. You've got to have their back. You're the one who gives them confidence that if there's something wrong, if they're seeing a problem, if they're not confident about the product they're building, they know who to come to. And they can come to you in confidence and you will do something about it. Product managers are a very weird role. You're leaders, but you're not officially leaders. Like, no one reports to you, but you are leaders. You're thought leaders, and you have to be like the person that everyone looks to and says, okay, I've got a problem, or I'm not confident, or this is a risk we're taking on. And you're the one who basically protects them, but also makes the right decisions for the team and the product. And
Mhm.
I think you have to also get very comfortable defending your decisions, but not just for the sake of defending them, more because you have a reason for making those decisions.
Mhm.
If you can explain that to your team, if you can be very transparent about it, I think that's always going to be good.
Mhm. I've read about companies where ideas come from the executives and then product managers have to implement them. So how does that change the dynamics?
A lot. It makes your product crappy. It makes you not want to work there.
Yeah, that makes sense also.
It's happened to me. It's never great when you're frustrated because someone told you to change everything that you were planning on doing, and you go to your team and you're like, well, we're not doing this. We kind of discussed this, like spent 2 days planning this or grooming this, and we're not doing this anymore. And your team says why, and the best answer you can come up with is XYZ said so.
Hmm.
That's bad.
So is it like a top-down approach? Top-down management decisioning?
Yeah, top-down management isn't great. It the
But
the
there are a
thing
lot of
is,
companies they follow, right? Like Microsoft or Amazon,
Apple.
Apple. Yeah.
well, yeah, but I think Amazon specifically follows a single-threaded ownership model also, which means, I mean, the product manager or whoever is in charge of that like vertical basically gets to call like the final shots. I think a lot of companies follow top-down management, you're right, but that's not necessarily top-down management. Top-down management can also be, so your OKR settings will always be top-down, right? But how you choose to roll up to them should be on a product manager. You can always, like, you should always have control over your roadmap. Top-down management doesn't mean that your executive has to tell you what the roadmap has to be. They tell you what the final metrics need to be or the final KPIs need to be, but not necessarily what your roadmap needs to look like. So yeah, don't work for places that do that. It's just not great. It's not great to. Let me put it this way. You can also manage expectations both ways. There are times when you know that for art, like for whatever you're trying to drive, you have to take a certain number of steps. You know your team is going to hate that because they were really looking forward to cleaning up tech debt, whatnot, of course.
Mhm.
Or it's context switching for them, and that's fine. One of the things, so I work very closely with our CEO, and one of the things we've, he'll tell me, do this, do that instead, or like, why don't you implement this perfect design the first time around? And I'm like, okay, go back to the team. We're not doing the full thing. I manage that. I'm willing to take the ownership of that on myself. So if someone asks me, why wasn't it done this way? I'm like, we got a learning. We'll get the money in 2 months. I'm owning that decision. If your management is okay with that, that's good enough. If your management is not okay with that, is where the problem lies. They can't force you to force your team. That shouldn't be okay. That's just not fair.
So does managing expectations really rely on the way that you describe how you're making those decisions?
Yeah, be very transparent, be very candid. It depends on the work culture, frankly. I can't operate where there's no transparency. So even when there is no transparency, I am probably like super transparent, which a lot of people don't like, because a lot of people go, why to go tell the executive that? And I'm like, well, because it is what it is. I'm not going to be able to deliver what they think we're going to deliver, and I'm not going to fudge it, and I'm not going to force my team to kill themselves and work extra hours to deliver something that's going to be subpar anyway. But yeah, you definitely want to manage it, those expectations right. You want to be as transparent as you possibly can. You want to be very clear-minded about why you're making the decisions you're making. Your decisions should never rely on your judgment alone, especially if you're starting out as a young PM, or, like you've never done PMing before. Your judgment doesn't hold a lot of value. Especially when you're like talking to executives who've been in the business for 30 years and they're like, what do you know? It's like, well, okay, I get it. But if you can find data, if you can find customer, if you can find survey data, use that. Use that to make your case. It is exhausting to be constantly making your case in front of people, and it's so much more productive to just be able to work the way you want to work. But having said that, for a lot of companies, product management is a pretty significant part of your time is going to be justifying yourself. Be prepared for that mentally. There are some leading signs during the interview process that'll tell you that that's likely to happen. Ask the right questions to figure out if that is likely to happen. Hey, how do you all do road mapping? Getting to that. Yeah, exactly. What are those questions? How do you do road mapping? How often do you all do road mapping? Is the roadmap quarterly? Is it yearly? That gives you an idea of, is it globally done? Is it locally done? How do you all handle sprint priorities? If I'm a PM reporting to director of PM, do all of us have the same priorities? Do you tell us the priorities? How do you all prioritize? How agile is it truly? Can you give me an example of a product? How long does it take for you to ship a product? And you'll figure out from these answers over, I think it takes time also to you'll work somewhere, you'll realize the right questions to ask. And then you learn from that. And you're like, the next time I look for a job, I'm going to check on these things. But yeah, broadly, road mapping, how often, how do they do it? How soon do they ship products? What's the expectation? Work from home. Always ask that, because that tells you how controlling your management is.
Also, one more.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Also, if you are looking to get into product management and you've not done that before, you should definitely ask about mentorship, which is what I realized 2 weeks into my internship. I asked for a mentor so that the decisions that I'm making and the work that I'm making, I have someone to go to and validate the thought process involved and stuff like that.
Yep, that's a really good point.
This goes back to the point you made about full transparency. Well, if you're managing expectations on both parties, then wouldn't full transparency betray the trust of either parties and then make you the odd man out, or the odd
The
woman out?
snitch? No.
Yeah, the snitch.
The snitch. No. Full transparency doesn't mean I'm going to tell my manager, my team said A, B, C, and this is why we can't do it. Full transparency is saying, I decided we're not doing it because ABC. Those ABC may have come from my team. They may be my decision. But that's I'm giving you a reason. That's my transparency. I have a reason. I can prove the reason. But I'm not telling you who it came from. Same thing with the team. My team doesn't get to hear what my manager is telling me to do. My team hears what they want me to do. That's all that matters. That's all they need to know. But if I'm telling them we're changing our priorities or we're going to focus on something else this sprint, although we planned on something else, I think I owe them a reason.
Right.
Why.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be, like I said, if your reason is my manager told me, then you're not doing your job. Your reason should be a little bit more concrete than that. Like, hey, I think overall as a company, we're trying to hit a certain revenue goal, and we can ignore all of these other things for now while we focus on hitting this number. Once we do, we'll pull these things in. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Also, I missed the question you mentioned about working from home. Did you say ask how long?
No, ask about work from home. Even if you don't actually care about working from home as much, ask about it because it tells you how your management views their employees and how much they trust them. A company that usually cares about you being in office most of the time is also a company that's going to question every single thing you do.
Okay, so it's a trust dynamic.
Yeah. Your team's ability to trust, your ability to make your team trust you, and your ability to trust your manager actually are the two things that determine your success as a product manager. So
it's a game of trust.
Yes, it is.
Since I have a few guys still left, let me quickly share the feedback form, which totally skipped my mind, so engrossed in the event and the conversation.
Oh,
So
I just
just
chat.
Oh, it's already in the chat.
Yeah, I just have it.
Okay, yep. Guys, whoever's left on call, please fill out the feedback form. That definitely helps us and helps our speakers as well to understand how the session went and what could be made better for the future events and so on. And definitely, it's always a pleasure listening to you, Anwesha. Enjoyed the last two events. In fact, Dikshit and I messaged each other just as we got off the last call that was our best session, till date. And even today, if you see, we've spent 45 minutes just talking about questions, and I've not seen that happen on previous events. So it's really easy for us to communicate with you, and we really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Have a
Thank
good
you all.
night, y'all. Bye.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye bye. Thank you so much again. Bye bye.
Bye.